Lucky Enough. The Lucky O'Toole Vegas Adventure Series, Book 11, by Deborah Coonts. Narrated for you by Patricia Santamasso. Chapter 1. Almost home, miss. The first officer peeked his head through the open doorway of the small office off the largest bedroom in the back of the plane. I'll need you up front and belted in for landing. Thank you. I shut down the computer and my efforts to try to catch up on what had been going on in Vegas while I'd been gone. My name is Lucky O'Toole, and for the last 2 weeks, or more, I'd been ignoring my responsibilities as the Vice President of Customer Relations for the Babylon Group, the owner of multiple properties in Vegas and one of the primo strip properties. Not that a couple of hours over the Pacific would get me up to speed, but it might help me hit the ground running. I reached to flip off the satellite television, showing a live feed of the local news. The face on the screen stopped me. My best friend, Flash Gordon, newshound extraordinaire, reporting from a local party. Not her usual beat. As the sun was out, it looked like the party was earlier this afternoon. I glanced at my watch. Just after midnight. In the feed, Flash interviewed another buddy of mine, Jordan Marsh, Hollywood heartthrob. They were promoting the Concours d'Elegance, a fancy car party starting soon, so I didn't bother with the sound. Next to Jordan, attempting to squeeze into a sliver of importance, bobbed a man I didn't know. Tall, thin, graying temples, and a smile that would have most smart men grabbing their wives and daughters. There was one in every crowd. I shook my head and snapped off the TV. That was Vegas right there. Fancy cars, celebrity cachet, and a regular Joe soaking it up for the weekend, perhaps pretending an importance he didn't have. The pilots pulled back power and started our descent as I buckled in. The lights of Las Vegas spread across the valley below, thousands of pinpoints in the desert darkness. At 10,000 feet, the plane skimmed over the Sunrise Mountains, then started the drop to final approach, the end of a very long trip. Along the way, I'd left broken hearts, numerous bodies, and perhaps some sanity in my wake. It struck me that a few short weeks ago, I'd started out heading west, and had kept going until I'd come full circle. Home again. Odd when the beginning can be the end. Sort of like that old joke, when do you leave home to get home? Guess my life resembled a game of baseball. Hadn't struck out yet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the damage I'd left behind wasn't going to stay in my rear view. The plane that now carried me home, one of the Babylon's G650s, certainly had made a clean getaway all the easier. I thought I'd left each country with the approval and most likely the enthusiasm of the local constabularies, but I wasn't entirely sure. At some point, it would be my luck to land on the wrong side of a modern-day avert. Despite the body count, there'd be only one near fatality on the side of truth, justice, and all of that. One of the fractured hearts was mine. Thankfully, my body had survived. Most of the time, I was grateful for that. I pressed my nose to the window as the pilot banked the plane lining up on final approach. Landing to the north put the strip on the left side of the plane. The lights beckoned with a false promise of fun. Oh, don't get me wrong. For most who came here, the city delivered. But not for me. As the chief problem solver of the Babylon Group, my business card reads Vice President of Customer Relations, but let's be real. It was my job to keep the Vegas magic burning bright for all who stepped across the threshold of one of our properties. Consequently, I'd seen behind the curtain. And once you see the levers and gears, the magic isn't quite as magical. For me, Vegas was not a holiday, not one last toot with my BFFs before the impending stranglehold of marriage, nor did it provide even a simple weekend fantasy to offset the drag of real life. No, Vegas was my real life, my home, and it was no fantasy. Like everybody else, I lived with my problems lurking with the dust bunnies under the pieces of large furniture and whispering from the shadows. But unlike everyone else, I didn't have Vegas in which to offload them, not even for the weekend. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes, contemplating exactly where to begin my reentry, how to solve a few of the looming problems, but I hadn't a clue. I'd left a beautiful young girl killed on my watch in London, a broken engagement in Paris, and a slew of bodies and unanswered questions in Bordeaux. I'd delivered a Hong Kong financier on the run from some very scary triad enforcers to Monte Carlo with only the slimmest chance to right a wrong and save his own hide. But those paled in the light of my worst problem. My father, the head and heart of the Babylon Group, still struggled to recover from a bullet to the chest. My mother couldn't, or wouldn't, tell me how sick he really was. If he died, it would change everything. Between you and me, I found adulting to be a cruel hoax perpetrated on happy children. I once was a happy child, I think. But that little slice of Norman Rockwell, the only slice of Norman Rockwell in my childhood, was so far in my rear view, it had vanished in the haze. Glad to be back? A familiar voice knifed through my little bit of dirty laundry airing. Detective Romeo. For a moment, I'd forgotten about him. My personal Sir Galahad, who had ridden to my rescue. His take, I let him have the fantasy. He'd arrived in Paris as I touched a match to the fuse and fireworks lit the sky. He'd stayed to help me pick up the pieces, then caught a ride home, via Monte Carlo. While he was my secret weapon in the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, Metro to us locals, he was just a kid. Although tonight, he looked way more world-weary than his years would allow. In fact, he looked as tired as I felt. Despite the now mashed lei around his neck, the white plumeria blossoms starting to brown. We'd stopped for fuel in Hawaii and had done the whole customs and island thing. At the time, I'd resented the time it had taken, but was grateful now we'd done it. Romeo blinked at me, clearly expecting some kind of response. I couldn't remember to what. Dark circles underslung his red eyes. The hint of worry lines bracketed his mouth and radiated from the corners of his eyes. Somewhere over Indonesia, he'd stopped worrying about straightening his tie or combing his hair. The flag of a cowlick sprung from the crown of his head. I resisted the urge to brush it flat. A hint of sympathy lit the blue of his eyes, faded by lack of sleep. You left a lot of shit back there. Home must feel good. His attempt to make me feel better was appreciated, but fell short of the mark. Not his fault. For some reason, I wasn't feeling the homecoming joy. Must home feel good? Did it? Jet-lagged and heartbroken, and more than a little panicked, I didn't have an answer for him. In fact, I didn't have any answers, period. Heck of a place for a professional problem solver. The only answer I could give him was a shrug. As the wheels kissed the runway, he turned to look at the strip out the window that still held my nose print. Pretty amazing, isn't it? He was still young enough to be awestruck. One constant in a sea of change. Too tired to muster a grin at the irony. If Vegas stood for anything, it was change, even if only for a weekend. I pulled my phone out of my bag and powered it up. A few seconds of silence, no more, and texts pinged like the ringing of a come-to-dinner bell, but without eliciting the same salivating anticipation. Romeo and I both looked at the offending device. Damn, he said. You must be important. His smile told me he thought so. I wasn't so sure. Being the one who stops the proverbial buck makes me popular, but I'm not so sure about important. Miss P, the head of customer relations for the Babylon Casino Hotel, our most exquisite, over-the-top strip property, and my right-hand man, caught me before I had a chance to begin to tackle the texts. I answered her call on the second ring. Have you been bugging the FAA again? I have a copy of your flight plan. One more bit of proof that I could indeed run, but not hide. Along with a detailed transcript of my last visit to my therapist. You don't have a therapist. An oversight soon to be corrected. Right. She knew me well. Whining was my go-to when pressure mounted. Sharing my innermost thoughts with a stranger didn't promise the same immediate gratification. Can we talk now, without the whine? Oh, if you insist. As the plane slowed to a taxi, Romeo pushed himself up and disappeared toward the back. I took his place at the window, working to draw energy from the wattage outside. I'd been told the strip could be seen from a galaxy far, far away. As I blinked against its brightness, I believed it. What you got? The lure of a problem that perhaps I could actually solve tickled me. The old happy-to-be-home tingle shivered through me. A faint shiver, but there. I'm sorry to do this to you, but we've got a dead guy. A dead guy? Oh, yeah, right in my wheelhouse. As I tucked the phone between my shoulder and ear and pushed up my sleeves, I resisted pondering what that said about my life. How fresh? Still warm. Where? Delivery Bay 7. Police are on their way. Jerry's pulling the security feed. You know the drill. I did. Death was the flip side of the fun and frivolity in Vegas. Like all the properties, we had our share. But a dead guy in a delivery bay raised questions. He couldn't be explained away like a tapped-out gambler deciding to go out in a blaze of idiocy, or a panicked John shoving a roughed-up woman under a bed, or one of the millions of private negotiations that went on all over town going bad. I've got Romeo with me. Paolo is on his way to get you. Thanks. Anything else I need to know? Oh, we've got the full complement of crazy this weekend, but I can fill you in later. Miss P sounded tired. Little wonder. Vegas was a nonstop mischief shop, and we were the proprietors. No doubt, my Paris respite, with its lure of a normal life with a normal schedule, had eroded my 24/7 skills. Although there had been the guy stuffed in a barrel of wine, and then the shootout in Bordeaux. Maybe I wasn't as rusty as I feared. Besides, fire tempers steel, and this one would be hot, even by Vegas standards. Did my father get home safely from the hospital? Yes. Her tone turned guarded. I'm really surprised they discharged him so soon. A good sign, don't you think? A pause. They didn't. They didn't what? I asked, sitting up a bit straighter. This rat was stinking to high heaven. He left. They didn't discharge him. He just walked out of the hospital? That sounded so much like my father. He said he had to talk to you. It's important. He's okay, right? Resting comfortably, according to your mother. No one was ever comfortable in my mother's presence, least of all her family, but I took the words at face value for comfort. Okay, dead guy first on the list, my father second. I disconnected without waiting for a reply, then tossed my phone on the seat next to me. Am I lucky or what? I said to no one in particular. Romeo plopped back down in the seat across from me, looking all spit and polished, his eyes bright with anticipation. People get shot for saying that in your presence. He watched me, his brows stitched together with worry. I shot him a bit of a slitty eye. Unchastised, he grinned. Of course, he had a beautiful fiancée who would be very glad to see him. That could sure scrape away the travel grime. I hated to dim his wattage, but I needed his help. Your homecoming will have to wait. We've got a bit of a problem. I filled him in on the few details I had. A puppy eyeing a bone, he perked up. If he had a damn tail. A look of grown-up competence replaced his slobber dog. Personally, I liked the slobber dog better. It reminded me of the gee whiz kid he'd been when we first met. Now he was grasshopper all grown up and ready to snatch the stone from my hand. He pulled out his notebook and pencil, then shot me a half smile. A dead guy, you say? Welcome home. Home. I took a deep breath. A dead guy in the delivery bay, and all manner of craziness yet to be discovered and waiting to be dealt with. Problems to solve, magic to preserve. The old sizzle burns stronger just under the surface. Home. Yes, it was good to be back. As the plane rolled to a stop and the pilots shut down the engines, Romeo jumped up to help the first officer lower the stairs. Once the stairs had descended, they both stepped aside to let me go first. "We'll call for your car, Miss O'Toole. I believe one is waiting in the parking lot." The first officer held out his hand. Fresh-faced, his cheeks devoid of stubble, his hair still wet from a recent combing. Heck, even his shirt was pressed, and his pants still held a crease. He looked as if he could go around the globe again. Of course, he also looked like high school was still in his future. I wasn't sure when they allowed mere children to fly, but somehow I'd missed it. "Watch the first step. It's bigger than you think." Even though the idea that he would think I needed help rankled, I put my hand in his. "Thank you," I said, surprising myself with a hint of sincerity. Romeo coughed behind me. "Manners, grasshopper," I hissed over my shoulder. The reference did a flyby right past the first officer as he continued without a hitch. "We'll grab your luggage," he said with the perfunctory tone of an order shaped like a suggestion. Jean-Charles had an irritating way of doing the same thing. Jean-Charles. "Are you French?" I asked the young officer as I paused at the top of the stairs. Romeo sniggered behind me. "No, ma'am. I'm from Idaho." And cursed with a Y chromosome, I thought. From the bland smile on his face, I hadn't given word to my thoughts for once in my life, for which I was profoundly grateful. "I don't have time to wait for you to fetch my luggage. Would you send it later?" I charged down the steps, in too much of a hurry to wait for his answer. I folded a coat over my arm and took the stairs as quickly as I could with a tired, folded-up body and bulky parts. Why was it so easy to sit, but so hard to unbend and move again? Even my brain was having a hard time spooling up. The cold slap of wind provided the wake-up call I needed. Late spring in Vegas was a mercurial thing. Clouds scudded low, capturing the light and reflecting a multi-hued but mostly pink glow. The sting of a wind-driven pellet or two stung my cheeks. Water of any sort occupied a spot on the endangered species list here in the middle of the Mojave, so rain, or more precisely, corn snow, would likely cause citywide wonderment. I welcomed anything that hinted of a season other than unblinking sunshine and skin-melting heat. Tonight, snow, but tomorrow could be sunbathing weather. Nobody could forecast it, least of all the weathermen. A low, dark limo with the Babylon logo scrawled in hot pink down the side stopped at the bottom of the stairs. The pink had been my idea. I still liked it. My father tolerated it, but occasionally, when he thought I was out of earshot, did grudgingly admit it had a certain flair. We made a good team, father and daughter, cut from the same cloth, but with a chromosomal orientation that differed, yet complemented. Paolo, the Babylon's head chauffeur, jumped out of the driver's side, smashing his chauffeur's hat on his head as he greeted me with a smile that hinted at his normal wattage, but seemed dimmed, perhaps by the demands of a weekend already spooling at a high RPM. "Miss Lucky!" He opened the back door with a flourish. "Welcome home!" Paolo always spoke in exclamation points, something that used to bother me. Not tonight. Not anymore. Life held precious few superlatives. My lungs did a happy dance as I paused, breathing in the cold and damp. A few lungs full, then I dove inside. "The Babylon, step on it." I'd always wanted to say that, but tonight it didn't make me smile. Romeo barely had enough time to scramble in next to me before Paolo threw the car in gear and hit the gas. The acceleration threw Romeo back against the seat. Shit! Apparently, he hadn't graduated to 5 letters from 4, as I'd been trying to do as I navigated my former fiancé's, Jean-Charles's, turf. French society frowned on such common vulgarity. Turns out common was sorta where I lived. Growing up in a whorehouse didn't prepare one for navigating the halls of palaces filled with the intrigue, backstabbing, and head-lopping, the whispers of kings and queens long dead. I pursed my lips as I pondered that. On second thought, maybe it did. My sentiments, I said, embracing Romeo's base assessment. As I watched the scenery race by and tried not to think about the number of tourists we endangered, I wondered just how much my parents and Miss P hadn't told me. I glanced at the rear view to catch Paolo's eyes, racketed by worry, taking quick peeks to check on me. "What is it, Paolo?" Surely he wouldn't know any details about my father, or the dead guy. For me, a toss-up in importance. Duty or family? Wasn't that a historical choice suffered by many throughout the annals? Just carve my name next to Gandhi, who gave up sex with his wife to best serve his people. Okay, not Gandhi. Maybe Richard the Lionheart, or Alfred the Great. "I picked up Mr. Teddy yesterday," Paolo said, his usual verve wilting to a whisper at the end. Romeo swiveled a look as I absorbed the punch. "See," I held out my arms wide. "All I have to do is think about sex, and his name comes up." Obviously, my self-censor had taken a break. Of course, that presupposed I had any sort of filter. If I did, we weren't terribly well acquainted. That left Romeo struggling to keep up as red crept up his cheeks. "You were thinking about sex?" An odd thing, I know, all things considered. I won't explain how I got there. Besides, they say men have a sexual thought every 7 seconds. I'm merely trying to keep up. Lowering your personal expectations, I should think. Romeo coughed and straightened his tie, angling for a look in the side mirror, a thinly cloaked attempt to avoid my slitty eye. Paolo's eyes hid the hint of the smile I could not see. I eyed Romeo. Yes, the student had truly become the teacher. Indeed, I will endeavor to give up my game. What was it they said? Women who wanted to be equal to men weren't very ambitious. In a rare show of self-regulation, I kept that to myself. "Mr. Teddy is here because of his show," Paolo added. "He asked if you'd gotten home." His show! Of course! I'd forgotten. My father, in a flagrant if rare break with family loyalty, had booked Teddy into the theater at the Babylon. In addition to being a super hot, super virile man whose voice could make the Pied Piper jealous, especially if he was interested in luring women instead of children, Teddy was also Vegas's foremost female impersonator. Yes, the first man I'd given my heart to not only looked better in a dress than I did, but he also had daddy issues. I'd snatched my heart back. Well, after he'd cut me loose. But I'd left a piece of it behind. Guess that's how it worked with love. If I were the great poobah of the universe, I'd change that. That way, the aftermath of a failed love affair would be a bit less devastating. Not that there was any risk I'd ever assume that throne. "And what did you tell him?" I asked Paolo, who was spending far too much time nervously glancing at my reflection rather than at the road in front of him. Paolo slunk down a bit in his seat, which made him all but disappear, not exactly comforting. "I told him you'd be home tonight." He dropped even lower. I inched toward the edge of the seat and leaned over the front. "I hope from down there you can see more than I can from back here." People and buildings, signs and cars passed by outside the window in an alarming blur. "Not so much." I reached over the seat and pulled him up by the shoulder of his jacket, reinstalling him to where I was pretty sure he could at least see through the steering wheel. My whereabouts aren't a secret. Not that I wanted Teddy anywhere within eyesight until I figured out how to handle all my mixed emotions. Did I love him? Sure. Did I trust him? Not on your life. Could love exist without trust? Or did it become something else? Once broken, could it ever be repaired? Or was it forever lost? Could those questions even be answered? Terrific. I wondered if the show was the only reason he was here. Part of me wished it so. The other part wasn't so sure. Romeo touched me on the arm. It'll be okay. Teddy and I had dodged bullets together in France. Bonding through bullets didn't sound like the glue to hold a relationship together. And there was still that bit where Teddy had thrown me over for some young songbird and the huge ego boost. Now he was back and singing a different tune. Sounded a bit off-key to me. Okay. I arched an eyebrow at the young detective, who, to his merit, didn't wilt. One way or the other. There was a tiny continuum between homicide and rekindled love. Where Teddy and I would fall was anybody's guess. Come on, kid. Let's go solve some problems. Remember, no matter how shallow life gets, it's nice to be needed. Somehow, between you and me, I think we're looking for mental health in all the wrong places. Chapter 2. The young detective dogged my heels as I pushed through the glass double front doors of the Babylon into the lobby. 10 steps in, I stopped, then turned slowly in a circle as waves of energy from the milling crowd washed over me, lighting me up like juice from a wall socket. Okay, now I was home. The blown glass hummingbirds and butterflies still flew overhead. Skiers of all levels still shushed down the indoor ski slope behind a solid wall of plexiglass to my right. A tribe of scantily clad young men and women still laced through the crowd with trays of flutes filled with champagne. At this time of night, the lines at reception were shorter. However, each desk still had 2 or 3 patiently waiting as they sipped their libations. Sheets of multicolored cloth tented above the long reception desk, the colors matching the mosaic tiles inlaid in the marble floors. Wall sconces with flames under glass lent an air of desert mystery. On the far side of the lobby, the trees and shrubs lining the indoor meandering waterway I lovingly referred to as our very own Euphrates buffered the sounds of winners and losers from the casino beyond. Frank Sinatra crooned from the hidden speakers, a bit of old Vegas for my benefit, I had no doubt. The excitement, the fun, the magic was palpable. Home. I'd forgotten. Vegas had always been my Shangri-La. Apparently, I didn't shrivel up and die if I left, but my mojo took a hit, that was for sure. Vegas was the only place I felt useful. I had no idea what that meant, or how to fix it. Miss P's voice pierced my reverie. "Lucky, there you are." She hurried toward me, all spiked blonde hair, oversized glasses, pinched face, and perfect ensemble. "I'm sorry," she said, looking every bit like she meant it. Before she could explain, a man shouldered her out of the way, drawing a scowl from me. "Miss O'Toole?" The man was unremarkable in every way, thin, with the pinched look of a former junkie, tats, and long hair to match. At least his clothes were clean. "Please, your manners?" I drew myself up to my full 6 feet. I had him by a couple of inches, which put a bit of steel in my backbone. "You may not treat my staff with such disregard." "What?" He seemed genuinely confused. Not a good sign. Finally, he glanced at Miss P, who he had pushed aside. "Oh, sorry." He turned back to me, looking so not sorry. "You see, I've traveled a long way to see you." "Your lack of planning is not my problem. I've traveled halfway around the world, crossing so many time zones I don't know what day it is, much less what time. Make an appointment, preferably for day after tomorrow. By then, I might be ready to deal with whatever has your knickers in a twist." I turned to move past him. He stopped me with a hand on my arm and a growl in his voice. "You'll want to talk to me." Without letting go of me, he reached into his inside breast pocket, pulled out a black case, and flipped it open, flashing a badge. I gave it only a cursory glance and no appreciation. Then I leveled a look at him and lowered my voice. "Take your hand off my arm." "What?" "You heard me." I hid a waver in my voice. He was a Fed. I could sniff a Fed from a mile away. Feds always scared me, no matter what. They had more power than me and could make my life miserable. I'd done enough miserable for a while. He dropped his hand. A pink flush crept up his neck and colored his cheeks. I don't care who you are or what agency sent you. Hell, you could be on a mission from God, and I wouldn't care. If you want to arrest me, do it. Otherwise, get the hell out of my way. Romeo stepped forward and flashed his own bit of metal. You heard the lady. Somehow, he pulled that off. Even I was impressed. Although several inches shorter, Romeo held his ground. Apparently, his show was enough to appease the other guy. He stepped aside and we left him in our wake. I didn't turn to see if he followed. You think that was somebody from, across the pond? Romeo asked, his voice hushed. They don't have any jurisdiction here, I said with a lot more confidence than I felt. Just think, you could be a fugitive from justice. That's so cool. Now he added a bit of reverence to his tone. I'm not even going to begin to dignify that with any meaningful response. You just did, Romeo said, his glee leaking out through tight lips. He looked all of 12. He was acting like it as well. Halfway through the lobby and on our way toward the back of the hotel executive in me absorbed my surroundings. Excitement hummed. Even the guests waiting for their turn at reception looked happy. Most clutched a flute of bubbles and snuck wide-eyed glances at their fellow travelers and the over-the-top grandeur of the lobby. I winced as one of the foolhardy took a tumble on the indoor ski slope, where the brave slipped and skidded, sometimes face first, down the groomed hill. The whole thing was a carefully curated collection designed to inspire awe and a desire to absorb it all. I felt a smile bloom. It seemed to be working. After a bit of gloat, and prodded by Romeo's goading, I returned to the business at hand. Who the hell was that? I asked Miss P as I glanced at the agent's still visible back as he retreated toward the casino. Of course, she'd been silent during Romeo's torture, letting me have my due. DEA, she said with a shrug. DEA? My feathers ruffled. If there's anything a hotel owner hated, it was the feds nosing around the property. Damn. And he's loose in our hotel? I flipped a quick frown in her direction. You know the feds make the guests twitchy, and twitchy guests go to other properties to throw their money around. I didn't have a babysitter. We are maxed out. I took her word for it. With my father's health gnawing at me, right now I couldn't process much more than a dead guy. I'm sure she was dealing with a similar overload. Any idea what he wanted? Only to talk with you. Specifically you. No one else. I tried foisting him off on our new controlled substances concierge, but he would have nothing of that. I skidded to a stop. Our what? Since the new law legalizing marijuana, I know about that. Color rose in her cheeks. You told me I was in charge, and with everybody coming here now to get their toke on, so to speak, the concierge desk couldn't handle all those requests, as well as the normal dining and show stuff. She wound to an insecure stop, her eyes toward the ground, where she dug a toe into the mosaic. Good idea. I had no idea what qualifications would be necessary to execute that position, and frankly, I didn't want to know. Not now, anyway. Miss P's head popped up. You think so? Yes. But really the only thing that matters is that you think so. You're the boss. I'm the titular figurehead, staggering under corporate responsibilities, who doesn't get to do anything fun anymore. She didn't smile. I guessed she couldn't tell whether I was being funny or not. I didn't blame her. I couldn't tell either. Come on. I moved my little party of 3 forward. Death awaits. You make it sound like so much fun. Romeo sounded happy too. A dysfunctional duo if there ever was one. He fell in beside me as I charged across the lobby with Miss P on our heels. At the end of the long reception desk, we turned left, banging through a set of double doors and into the back of the house. Immediately, the atmosphere changed. While the front of the house was about excitement, the back of the house was about quick, quiet efficiency. Here, thick carpet absorbed the footfalls of staff rushing to meet guests' needs, some pushing carts, some peeking from behind piles of fresh, crisp laundry. All of them men and women on a mission to please. Single file, we were careful not to interfere with the meticulously choreographed efficiency. Having worked in every department in the hotel, I'd memorized these back hallways. They were the map of my young adulthood. They were the map that led me here, to the life that defined me. "We take a right at the next intersection," I said to my two colleagues trailing me. Not that verbalizing directions was necessary. They'd follow wherever I led. After that, I didn't give them a running turn-by-turn. Within minutes, maybe less, we pushed through another set of double doors and found ourselves at the receiving dock. A broad cement platform at the exact height of the 18-wheeler containers when they would back in. That way, all the contents could be directly offloaded and taken into the building without lift devices needed. Much like a large distribution center you'd find out in the middle of nowhere where major highways crossed. When I worked in procurement, I was astounded at the amount of product it took each day to supply a 4,000-room hotel with 5 bars, 2 major nightclubs, a string of high-end shops, 2 theaters, an arena seating over 25,000, and a convention center rivaling the best and largest in the country, not to mention all the pools, sandwich bars, the spa. Well, you get my drift. This late at night, the place still swarmed with people and buzzed with activity. Trucks left, others came, a symphony of backup beepers filling the night. The overhead argon bulbs sputtered and hissed, but lit the place with midday brightness. Several bays down, lights strobed blue and red. The police were on the scene. Yellow crime scene tape cordoned off an area. Workers wielding dollies and push carts, forklift operators, and other personnel all with heads down, bent on a mission, flowed around the off-limits section like a school of fish avoiding a shipwreck. Everyone glanced at us with limited curiosity when we burst through the doors. One of them, catching sight of me, peeled herself from a cluster of men after barking a few orders. "Miss O'Toole, good to see you, ma'am. I expect you're here about the fuss down the way." As he shrugged out of a gray hoodie, he tilted his head to indicate farther down the long row of bays. The hoodie he tossed in a garbage bin, along with some booties he shucked off his shoes. "Getting down and dirty making inspections. Before that, I was getting down and dirty at my place. It's a new thing. We collect junk equipment, break them down, and let tourists pay us for the chance to beat them with sledgehammers. Folks got a ton of frustration, you know." Jeff Morton had been one of my first hires. A stickler, as I recall. He'd risen through the ranks, and now was one of the old-timers, conducting the flow of essentials in and out of the hotel. His weathered face showed every second of his years outside in the desert sun. Of course, here in the Mojave, it was impossible to guess the actual age of the folks who worshiped the sun. In return, the sun sucked the youth right out of them, desiccating all who dared raise their face to soak up the rays. His Babylon shirt looked like it was an original issue, yellowed with age and frayed from use. His jeans were holdovers from a thinner time. They no longer circled his middle, so he'd adjusted them below his belly, like many men dealing with the same issue. I'd bet most women wondered, as I did, what kept those pants up, especially when the men's butts had diminished in proportion to the gains in their bellies. But the better part of self-preservation was not to ask. Some things were meant to remain a mystery. "Apparently. Good to see you. I'm glad to have experience on the dock tonight, all things considered." "Been a bit crazy, yes ma'am." He had a hard time meeting my gaze as he shifted from foot to foot. We all turned at a growl that raised goosebumps and a primal flight response. A forklift driver had speared a cage in which an agitated tiger paced and occasionally roared his displeasure. "There's 4 of them," Jeff continued without a hitch, "followed by a whole gaggle of geese." "What could go wrong?" I said. not expecting an answer. I offload them. What happens next is your problem. He consulted a clipboard. These are for some swimsuit and lingerie show. I glanced at Miss P. As I said, a whole lot of crazy, she replied with her usual nonchalance. Another crate went by filled with sleek furred animals. What are those? I couldn't help but feel a bit of panic. Animals among the guests? While it was part of the show, I could imagine all sorts of disasters. Actually, imagination wasn't required. I'd seen a lot of disasters, cleaned up most of them. Jeff consulted his clipboard again, then shrugged. Private party. I resisted the urge to derail a murder investigation over a crate full of ferrets. I'm sure you have it all under control. I lifted my chin toward the crime scene. What can you tell me about that? Truck was here when I got here. It was clocked in sometime yesterday afternoon and had just been sitting here. This being a crazy weekend, we needed the bay. He swallowed hard and ran a hand over his gray stubble. Keys were in the ignition. He pulled them out of his front pocket and jangled them. The driver was nowhere to be found. I took it upon myself to move the thing. We do that sometimes. The field across the way is a great place to park the empty rigs while the drivers are inside doing whatever. You moved it? Yeah. I just inched it forward when the guy started shouting. The guy was under there. We just couldn't see him. What time was this? Just after my shift started. So, after midnight? Yeah. Like I said, it had been here a while. His legs are sticking out the back. You didn't see him? No, ma'am. It was busy. I was in a hurry and a bit pissed. Wasn't looking for no body. Jeff looked a little pale. You ran him over? That would almost be an open and shut case. I crossed my fingers behind my back where nobody could see them. I see that. Romeo leaned in and whispered in my ear. The secret to my superpowers, I whispered back. Secret's safe with me. Yeah, until he needed blackmail, but I was good with that. Jeff waited. You done? He asked with a tight smile. Sorry, I said, but was so not sorry. You asked if the guy had been run over. Not so lucky. He paused for effect. It didn't give him the reaction he was looking for, so he continued. Someone bashed his head in, then parked the truck to hide the body, I'm guessing. And he became my problem. God knows why. He shrugged. We both knew why. As I'd said, I was the one who stopped the proverbial buck. My hotel, my problem. You see anything that might be pertinent? No, ma'am. It was all sort of strange, though. Although now he could meet my gaze, he couldn't hold it. Dead guys could spook anybody. With one hand, he lifted the baseball cap that kept his mop of gray hair corralled, scratched his head, then replaced his cap, adjusting it until satisfied. The truck was still there, an 18-wheeler that bore the logo of one of the national rental agencies. What was in it? That was what was strange. Just a car, ma'am. A car? Just one? That truck could hold multiple cars. And we can't find the car anywhere in the hotel. Was it perhaps a Bugatti? Miss P asked as she stepped in beside me. His hands shook as Jeff double-checked his clipboard. Yep, that's it. Never heard of one. Guess it's out of my price range. He gave a gap-toothed smile. Just sounds like something fancy and worth more than I'll earn in a lifetime. I raised an eyebrow in question at Miss P. What's the link? Her turn to do the clipboard thing. The car, more specifically an orange Veyron, camel interior with custom orange stitching, I have the VIN if you'd like it, is on the roof. It's registered to some fancy car outfit in Sonoma. It's on the list of things I plan to go over with you later. They had a helicopter waiting. They airlifted the car and put it on a platform over the pool at Babel. Babel was our primo rooftop club and one of the hottest tables in town. The best place to see and be seen in Vegas, as the Review Journal, our local rag, described it. We couldn't buy PR like that. And now we had a car in the middle of it. They didn't pull any permits or get any permission from us? Nope. Normally, I could appreciate ingenuity, but when it crossed a few well-defined boundaries, like crashing my party, not so much. The least they could have done was give us a heads up. Spinmeisters that we could have done something fun with a fancy bit of iron on top of our hotel. Over the top was expected in this town, where we all competed for the top prize. You have time to research what Joker did this? On my list. The dead guy just pushed it to the top. Miss P nodded. Most of the time, she was a jump ahead of me. That used to bug me, but I managed using the philosophy of surrounding myself with people way more competent than me, then letting them do their jobs. Worked so far. What's going on at Babel that would warrant the trouble, not to mention the expense and the future legal fees associated with dropping a car in the middle of it? A private party for some of the NBA bigwigs and superstar players. When? Tomorrow night. I filed that away in the interesting factoid but haven't a clue as to the connection mental file. Jeff, you and your crew see anybody around that truck? Like I said, it was here when we came on duty. Before they left, we asked the guys what the deal was. They didn't know either. Well, a ghost didn't back that rig in here, offload a car, then move it out and strap it to a helicopter. Better call all the guys back in. Somebody had to see something. Jeff's face reflected the lack of enthusiasm he would find when he rousted a tired crew from sweet slumber. Death had a way of making everyone miserable until the dead got their due. They ain't going to like it, ma'am, he said, knowing I knew that, and also that it didn't matter. I turned to our young detective who, contrary to his normal operating procedure, had stayed silent. Detective, do you have anything? Who found the body? He asked, an obvious question that had flown right by me. The student had become the teacher. I was okay with that. Like I said, technically, I did, Jeff allowed, surprising me. Why the heck hadn't he mentioned it? Nobody knew nothing about the rig. Like I said, keys were in it. We needed the bay. At my look, he continued. Yeah, they're going to find my prints all over that rig. Don't worry. You fess up to the cops, and I'm sure Jerry can confirm via one of the security videos. That didn't seem to make him feel better. Can you tell me exactly what you did? I went nosing around, trying to see who I might call to come get the thing. I didn't point out the rental agency number was in 12-inch letters down the side of the thing. Given we had a death to investigate, I was glad he hadn't found someone to take the rig. And? I was just pulling it out. Was gonna park it in the sandlot next door. The guys started yelling. That's when I got out and seen him. Like I said, he paused and took a deep breath. His head. Blood. He shivered. I got the picture. We didn't have a death to investigate. We had a murder. Detective, your show. Don't leave. I'll want a formal statement from you later, Romeo said to Jeff, who nodded. And do your best to get the earlier crew in here. The truck was here when you got here at midnight? Jeff nodded. I got a report of the car and the helicopter from security about 9 in the evening, Miss P said. I wonder what happened in between, Romeo asked, not really expecting an answer as he jotted down some notes. Babel would have been closed. Like most of the clubs, it didn't even open until 10:30, and nothing interesting happened until the wee hours. Well, except for the deposit of a car. Next on my list would be a call to McCarran Approach, the air traffic guys and gals who controlled the airspace this close to the airport. Either the helicopter flew in without a clearance, and the pilot was in FAA custody, which would be best case for me, or somebody filed a flight plan and got permission to work this close to commercial traffic. Less ideal, but perhaps the plan could shed some light. Do you think you can try to find somebody who might have caught that car in mid-flight? I asked Miss P. A tourist? Anybody? Scour the internet. See what you can find. I know it was dark outside at the time they supposedly airlifted that thing to the top of my hotel. But with all the lights around here, maybe someone caught something. Miss P made a note. I've also added a note for you to call Tracon, she said when she was done scribbling, restoring our normal balance of her being one step ahead. Air traffic control might be my best bet at this point. Thanks. Romeo led the way down the platform, counting the bays, which wasn't necessary. Our target shone like a beacon, illuminated by multiple temporary lights. We stopped at the tape barrier. Forensics is here, I said unnecessarily. They were the only ones who needed 1,000 candle power to collect their microscopic specimens. The coroner, dressed in white coveralls, his shoes secured in booties, crouched on his haunches behind the truck and tilted his head to peer underneath. With one hand on the truck to brace himself, the coroner leaned as far as he dared while avoiding the pool of blood, now a dark red with a light skin forming on it, making it look slightly wrinkled. Much like the Wicked Witch of the East, 2 legs stuck out from under, not a house, but the trailer portion of the rig. They were clothed in what looked like warm-ups and ending in a pair of fairly righteous kicks, red and white with a thin line of black, probably a gift or an expensive aftermarket purchase. I wonder if he could be part of the NBA crowd filtering in, Miss P said from my shoulder. They're arriving already? Somewhere in the dark recesses, I remembered the big tournament was starting this weekend. In an effort to woo a professional team to relocate to Vegas, the power brokers hosted a tournament featuring all the rookies, or at least the top prospects, during the All-Star break, to mix it up for the local fans. Most of the teams participated. The tournament was a good way to have their brand new rookies get some court time at the professional level, which really helped the draw. The Rookie Fest had become one of our larger events. Miss P glanced at her phone. The casino was such a timeless place that even for the employees, one day stretched into another, then into another, until it was one unbreakable stream. Tournament starts tomorrow. My time and days were all mixed up, and I felt way behind. Circumnavigating the globe clearly jumbled what few active brain cells still pinged around my otherwise empty skull, complicating life reentry tremendously. Nothing like a dead guy to jumpstart the synapses. The police had set up a perimeter. 2 cops manned the alley side. They glanced our way. Recognizing Romeo, they waved him into the crime scene. He stepped over the tape, then moved around the perimeter, careful not to add any of his own trace to the scene. Miss P and I waited for permission to enter as I stifled the urge to say, Red Rover, let Lucky come over." When faced with death, my brain often made odd associations, and panic tended to override decorum, so I wasn't overly worried. At least for once I kept my juvenile urges to myself. A minor victory. "Hey, Doc," I said to the coroner, perhaps a bit too loudly as he startled and banged his head on the undercarriage. I winced, but resisted saying I was sorry. As a whole, women apologized way too much, and I'd resolved to do my part to stem that tide. He rubbed the top of his head as he squinted our direction. "Hey, Lucky, what took you so long?" "I've been tasked with letting the G650 stretch its legs. You got any idea how far that thing can go between fill-ups?" "Just a tick over 8,000 miles, he said without pause. "I've been at this job a long time. The stuff you learn. But to be honest, I'm really glad you were out joyriding, and you weren't dealing with another one of these. I've got my hands full tonight." He glanced skyward, even though he was under the overhang of the delivery bay. "Full moon?" I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. "You got any idea what was in the back of this rig?" I told him about the car. "On the roof? I doubt you've got an elevator that would take a load that size and weight." "Not all the way to the roof, and for sure, not to the nightclub." "So somebody airlifted it up there." He had the same thinking out loud habit I did. "About 9 p.m. today," Miss P said. "We're on it." Do you need access to the car? I asked. I'll send a team up to cordon it off. Once we're done here, we'll dust it, but it may not be worth it. Probably half the world has pawed on and drooled over the thing. Maybe not. It's on a platform in the middle of the pool. I glanced at Miss P, who confirmed. I patted my pockets looking for my phone. No joy. Where had I left it? I thought back. The airplane. I'd tossed it on the seat. Damn. Miss P knew the look. This wasn't the first time my phone had gone AWOL. Without being asked, she handed me hers. Thanks. I punched up Jerry, our head of security, and Tonto to my Lone Ranger in these sorts of messes. What's cooking, sweet cheeks? Momentarily at a loss, I struggled for the appropriate response. You call Miss P sweet cheeks? I really don't think I needed to know that. Oh, lucky. Sorry. Jerry's embarrassment blushed through the connection. I didn't know you were back. And that makes it so much better. Why don't I have a nickname? You're the boss. It wouldn't be right. He hadn't caught the tease in my voice. Then again, I'm not sure I'd put any in there. No, Miss P is the boss. I'm the corporate schmuck who circles in periodically to rattle cages. But, no buts. She's the me I used to be. Treat her as such. I wasn't sure I was doing her any favors equating her with me, but she was the boss. She'd earned it 1,000,000 times over. Jerry knew better. Old habits died hard. Yes, ma'am. Ma'am was a poor substitute for sweet cheeks. Okay, maybe not. Okay, not at all. Have you been made aware of the issue in the dock area? Yep, we pulled the tapes. You're not going to like it. Closing one eye, I eyeballed the locations of the cameras filming the bay. One of the dead zones? Well, we usually don't film the middle of the bay. No reason to. A truck is usually there. Most of the time, we're just interested in who's coming and going. First time we've ever had an issue. You've got a feed of the cab and one of the rear of the trailer, then? Correct. And we're assuming somebody whacked the guy in the bay, then pulled the truck over the body so they could make a getaway? That sounded far-fetched even to me. It's a theory. Jerry sounded skeptical as well. Yeah, we got a visual on the driver, and then on the back of the truck. I'm sending you a snap of the driver. He backed the car out and took it to the alley. A chopper was waiting. Dropped a harness. Slick bit of work. Send the snaps to Miss P's phone, please. You lost yours again? I didn't need to confirm what he already knew. I stared into the darkness beyond the bay. They would have had to roll the car out and get it in the middle of the alleyway in order to lift it. Still, whoever did the flying did a masterful job. They'd done it before. Big machines, heavy loads, tight spaces, disaster lurking only feet away on either side. We do have a quick shot of someone walking around the front of the truck, heading past the driver's door to where the guy was killed. Toward it. Assuming that's where the guy was killed, yeah. But that's all we got. Just somebody in torn jeans and a gray hoodie, face obscured, hands in the front pouch of his sweatshirt. Timestamp all the photos, including that one, and send them to Miss P's phone. And mine as well, in case I ever find it. Please. It's at the airport. What is at the airport? Your phone. Last time you lost the thing, I had IT put that Find My Phone feature on it. Saves us all a bunch of trouble. I didn't know whether to say thank you or accuse them of turning my work environment into a Big Brother state, monitoring all its citizens for deleterious activity. Replacing my phone every month or so did hit the bottom line of our department's profit and loss. This was one of those if-the-shoe-fits cases that hit a bit too close to home. In keeping with the idea that anything I said could be used against me, I decided to shuck and jive. And keep going over the tapes. You gave a copy to the police? They've already been up here. Good. Maybe some of their video wunderkind can find something. We didn't have the same level of talent in our surveillance room. Most of the folks monitoring our monitors were felons, well-versed in the ins and outs of cheating at all the gaming tables and machines. a whole different subset of criminal videography. Photos are on their way. Miss P's phone dinged their arrival before he finished. We'll keep looking for anything unusual. Keep me posted. I pressed the red button to end the call, then pocketed the phone. Miss P didn't argue. Sweet cheeks. I cocked an eyebrow at her. It's all just fun. Even she didn't sound like she believed that. You get the respect you demand. I needed not only to take my own advice, but do some serious changing around here. Miss P would never step fully into the role if I was always a shout away to handle the difficult stuff. I turned my attention back to the crime scene. Doc eyed me. You thinking what I'm thinking? He loved to play this game. The helicopter? He nodded. Either military or construction. Yep, he nodded, seemingly pleased with me. Doesn't really narrow it down. I got a beat on that. At least I hoped I did. It all depended on how many friends I had in air traffic control. When are you going to move the body? I'd like to get a look at the guy's face, see if he's one of ours. It'll be a while. I've sent you some photos. Yes, to Miss P's phone. I heard the conversation, and she gave me the number while you were busy avoiding responsibility for losing company property. He grinned, like he thought the whole thing was funny. This place isn't exactly the cleanest, he continued, circling back to my original question. It'll take some time to get a handle on the trace, and things aren't lining up right. As he pushed himself to his feet, one of his knees popped loud enough for all of us to hear it. Never should have done all that running back in the day. Exactly why I steer clear. Physical activity wasn't even in the top 10 of things I'd turn to for stress relief or self-betterment. And as excuses go, it was way better than anything I could come up with on my own. How do you mean, not lining up? Doc started to run a gloved hand through his hair, then remembered where those hands had been and what he was doing. First of all, if the guy was killed here, there's not enough blood for that kind of wound. He looked at Miss P. The car was unloaded and lifted around 9, you say? She nodded. Yeah, the time frame seems a bit off. The rigor is more advanced. I'll figure it out when I do a workup. Romeo retraced his steps back to us. What are you thinking? He asked me. Thinking is beyond my capabilities at the moment. What I've learned is we don't have any video of the murder, so this isn't going to be a cakewalk. Photographer is getting me a few pics of the dead guy. I need to see if he belongs to me. The thought made my blood boil. My people were my family. Sometimes even way better than my family, but that's for another day. Do you want to call air traffic, or do you want me to? Might be better if you do. You speak their lingo. Once a pilot, always a pilot, right? Romeo referred to my limited piloting skills. I'll do it. I pulled in a deep, steadying breath, then took a gander at the photos Jerry had sent. They were just as he indicated, not particularly helpful. Other photos started pinging their arrival, the photos Doc had referred to. I winced, but forced myself to look through them. Not pretty, but I hadn't expected them to be. While I'd been told death could be peaceful, welcome even, I had yet to experience that side. All of the exits I'd seen had been ugly. This one was no exception. I blinked away the images as I focused on Romeo. I'll shoot you some copies. I'm sure you'll get the full set with Doc's report. Which will be a while, Doc said, his voice muffled as he peered under the trailer, then motioned a tech over. He pointed to something and she fell to work. Full moon, remember? His voice strengthened as he reappeared. And this one isn't even close to the most bizarre exit tonight. I got 6 lined up in front of this one. At the look on my face, he paused. Okay, for you, I'll move him up the order. Should have something to you late day tomorrow. Today? He glanced at his watch. Yeah, later today. I'll buy you dinner at Tigress. Say 8 o'clock? My way of setting a firm timeline. That's bribing a public official. I gave him an innocent look. See you then. I can fill your head full of death and dismemberment over succulent muscles. My stomach turned. I understood using the macabre to deal with death, but combining it with food struck me as nauseating. I nodded anyway, and then turned to Romeo. You going to take the rental agency? We need to find out who rented that rig, I said unnecessarily. Romeo was used to my think-out-loud method. Yep. At my look, he said, Don't worry, I'll do it myself. He was well aware of my low opinion of the Metro Police Department, present company excluded, of course. Would you like to bribe this public official with perhaps a mixture of weird and wonderful healing waters at Delilah's? Later. If I don't let you get home to Brandy, my office is not going to be a happy place. Brandy was now Miss P's right-hand man, the position Miss P had occupied with reference to me before I got booted up the corporate ladder. That whole bit of ascension had been my bright idea. Yes, I was rethinking it. I belonged in the trenches, not corralling a bunch of suits with sticks up their asses. He glanced at his watch. She's just getting off. Perfect timing. I watched him lope off, leaving the crime scene to the dock and the night to Miss P and me. I steeled myself and took another gander at the photos Doc had sent, inviting Miss P to look over my shoulder. Jesus, she whispered. Not sure what this poor soul did to piss off the Almighty, but damn. I'd been right about the warm-ups, but I was surprised about the gray hair and receding hairline. Not one of the players, for which I was grateful. People being taken out of the life game early hit me the hardest. The guy looked like medium everything. Build, age, height, looks. The looks part was hard to tell, though. One side of his head had been bashed in, and blood had run down the side of his face. I looked up. Doc was still there. Any idea as to the murder weapon? I'm guessing something heavy. A torque wrench, maybe? Speculating, of course. Won't know more until I get some measurements on the fracture. But there's nothing just lying around with blood and fingerprints on it, if that's what you're hoping for. One can hope, can't they? No matter how many of these sorts of cases I stumbled across, I'd yet to have a Perry Mason aha moment where things just fell into place and the murder weapon dropped out of the sky. Still, hope springs eternal. You got any ID on the body? He tossed a questioning glance at the closest tech, who shook her head. I've taken prints, but it'll take me a bit to run them. I'll let you know if we get a hit. I'll pass the photo around. Maybe somebody around here, perhaps one of the NBA types, will be able to give us a name. A long shot if there ever was one. He was probably just a hapless hopeful, nosing around for access to somebody famous, but who stumbled on something he shouldn't have seen instead. I turned to Miss P. They are still arriving, yes? The tournament starts Saturday, like I said. At my caught-in-the-headlights expression, she clarified. That would be tomorrow. I looked back at the poor guy in the basketball gear who wouldn't get to see a game. Not fair, but thank God he wasn't one of mine. But who the hell was he? And what did he do that inspired someone to bash his head in? Lucky. Have you seen your father? Miss P's voice trembled slightly, or maybe I imagined it in my fear. That served as the cattle prod I needed to jolt me back. Not yet. You grabbed me when I hit the front door. Her face pinched with fear as she stepped away, so I could see her fully. You need to go. It's late. He'll be asleep. No. No, he won't. He's waiting for you. Chapter 3. Lucky! Come in! Come in! As I stepped out of the private elevator that deposited me in the main room of my parents' apartment, my mother rushed to greet me, chiffon swirling around her in a cloud of peach. With her cheeks pink, her brown eyes bright, her hair piled on her head in a haphazard chignon, caught with a tortoiseshell spike, and tendrils tickling her cheeks, she looked half my age. Family time, at least my family time, came at a price. While family typically provided a safe haven where one could lick the wounds inflicted by life, my family was, well, not that. At least, my mother, Mona, was not that. She grabbed my arm, ushering me into the great room of the apartment she shared with my father, Albert Rothstein, otherwise known as the Big Boss. Over her shoulder, I scanned the room. No signs of life. No sound emanated from the kitchen to my right. Lights had been dimmed. Where are the girls? My mother, apparently having learned nothing while running a whorehouse for most of her adult life, miraculously found herself with child recently. Of course, at her age, which I guessed to be somewhere just south of 50 if I had the family story chronology right, most women were past the fertile part. Not Mona. Of course, not Mona. But Mona also played fast and loose with the truth, so only one fact had been established beyond a reasonable doubt. I had two sisters. Yes, twins. Mona never did anything half-assed. Frankie and Sammy are asleep. It's late. Somewhere in the world, it's an acceptable hour to be awake. My body seems to be stuck there. I was thankful the girls had been corralled. I needed my father to myself. With the conviction of a woman on a mission, Mona propelled me past the lesser works of the masters that graced the walls. Perfectly lit, they looked a bit dour tonight, which increased my unease. We dodged the silk carpets on which nested tiny clusters of overstuffed furniture made from the hides of various beasts. The movable fireplace my father always insisted on lighting, especially this time of year, was dark, devoid of the dance of flames. She didn't turn left toward the hall that led to the private areas. Instead, she kept pulling more toward the couch facing the far wall of floor-to-ceiling windows. Mother, I peeled her fingers from my arm. I need to see Father. Her wattage dimmed, and her lip quivered. It had taken a lot of effort to put on a brave front. My heart fell. He's where he always is when you come to visit. You both love the windows. I'd hoped he'd be in bed. According to Miss P, that's exactly where he should be, with doctors hovering. What is this about him checking himself out? Mona lowered her voice and darted a glance toward the windows at the far end of the room. You know your father. Yes, but he's not going to help anyone if he's dead. I didn't bother with lowering my voice. In fact, I may have raised it a touch, hoping it would reach him. He could have waited for me in the hospital. He said the walls have ears there. That had the desired effect of stopping my bluster. This was so not good. Much more serious than I thought. What could possibly be that important? The pallor my mother had tried to hide under a thicker than normal layer of powder crept through. He wouldn't tell me. I couldn't tell if she was relieved not to be shouldering the weight or feeling a bit left out. Frankly, I'd be fine if he left me out of the loop, since I was currently handling what life had dished out so well and all. When my father and I were together, my mother often felt like a spare part. Or so she told me often enough that I should be more cognizant. I'm sorry. I patted her hand and put it back on my arm. If it's any consolation, I'm as terrified as you are. Hardly comforting, she said. But I could tell just having me to take the load had lightened her exponentially. Somehow, I felt okay with that, although I could tell she still wanted to be a part of it all. She led me toward the lights of the strip framed in the wall of windows on the far side of the room. The view of the strip unrolling at my feet filled me with awe every time, no matter how many times I'd seen it. Tonight was no different, although the worry muted the magic. Someone had told me the lights shone so bright they could be identified from the space station. As I blinked against them, I had no doubt. Turning my face to their sunlight, I closed my eyes and drew all the energy I could pull from them. Magic, isn't it? My father's voice, but a weaker facsimile. For over 60 years, I've drunk them in. Not necessarily from this vantage point, but I never got tired of them. I know. I didn't turn. If I looked at him, I'd see the man I heard in his voice. For a moment, I wanted to remember him as he always was. Short in stature, but bigger than life, Albert Rothstein owned every room he walked into, and probably most of the people in them. With jet black hair that had faded to salt and pepper through the years, a chiseled jaw that had taken many a blow, but had never lost its knife edge, and a ferocity only slightly muted by his ever-ready smile. He'd been one of the figures often touted as one of the influential founders of Las Vegas. Along with that came the implication he'd been mobbed up. I'd never asked, and I'd never seen anything that would give weight to the rumors. Of course, when I'd met him, I'd been 15 when Mona had sent me away from her whorehouse to study under his tutelage. He was a big part of the new corporate Vegas that had filled the vacuum when the family had been all but exterminated. At the time, I hadn't known he was my father. That little factoid came to light not too long ago. My parents had kept the secret all these 30-some-odd years. For good reason, yes. But the not knowing still had left a scar on a rootless kid. Time muted the pain, but it still throbbed when I took a long trip down memory lane. After hearing his voice, I took my time before I looked at him. Tonight it would be him drawing strength from me, and not the usual reverse. Something had shifted. Something big. Friends had warned me of the eventual change in roles between aging parents and fully fledged children, but I wasn't ready for it. I guess, like death, it comes regardless, and we all have to scramble to catch up. But he'd been my rock, the person I clung to in a storm, to whom I looked to ease my fears and focus my thoughts. He could always pull logic out of my emotional chaos. Clouds of self-doubt obscured the path forward without him. Funny how the specter of loss could vaporize the hurt. I sucked in a ragged breath, then let it out in a slow, steady stream as I fought to find courage. All I really wanted to do was crawl into his lap and let him hold me. Fathers and daughters, president and vice president, mentor and mentee, the normal balance of the universe. From the trajectory of his voice, I could tell he was sitting at the far end of the couch. Turning from the light and momentarily blinded in the relative darkness of the room, I felt for the couch, then eased onto the end closest to me, while my eyes adjusted. As things came into focus, a lump at the far end of the couch shifted. A head lifted. Gray hair, gray skin, a weak smile. He sucked in air, then let it out in short bursts, fighting pain. My father. I almost didn't recognize him. How long had I been away? 3 weeks? No more than 2. He'd lost years. Father. I found his hand under the blanket covering him and squeezed it. His skin was cold, thin, a crepey vessel, barely sufficient to hold his spirit. Lucky. He breathed the word like the whisper of a dream. I'm glad you're home. The effort to speak, to express, drew the energy from him. My petty problems with men, no, my problems with petty men, fled. My father had been my rock. Forceful, powerful, able to stare down the family back in the day and not end up a pile of bones bleaching in the Mojave. Yes, my story, and I was so sticking to it. Every girl needs a father who's a hero, no matter how late in life she gets him. Maybe his absence during my adolescence had something to do with my complete ineptitude with men. Not shifting blame, that was all mine. But an interesting theory for another day. When I looked deep into his eyes, now a watercolor wash of their former vibrancy, I caught only the barest hint of the man I'd always known. Fear exploded inside me in an icy rush. I shivered and worked my features into what I hoped was a warm smile. Be it until you are it. The Rothstein version of fake it until you make it. All the years of practice saved me now as I mustered a smile. However, shock still tightened my words until they fairly twanged. Good work in London. Thank you. He squeezed back. After he'd strong-armed me into going, I'd maneuvered a delicate situation at one of our properties there. My grudge evaporated. To be honest, the whole thing had been in my wheelhouse. I'd been the right choice, and I was strong enough to take the fallout. My father always knew the right puppet to make dance. What would I do when he wasn't here to make them anymore? Mona fussed with his blanket, tucking it in. Can I bring you anything, Albert? A smile lifted the corner of his mouth. Mona tisked. The doctor said no wild turkey. She glanced at me and softened. But a little won't hurt. With lucky. She disappeared in a swirl of fabric. How she did that, I'd never know. Surely I'd step on a hem and fall on my face. No, I didn't have her grace. I didn't have her looks. I didn't have her magnetism. I didn't have her femininity. But I had me. I was beginning to appreciate that. Mother, maybe bring the fireplace over? I raised my voice as she retreated into the darkness. It's a bit cold here by the window. Good idea! Her voice tinkled. Yes, it really tinkled. Back to me. Like I said, Mona never did anything half-assed, not even her self-appointed role as the perpetual sunshine fairy, although Mona's ego tended toward goddesses rather than fairies. Sorry about Jean-Charles, my father said, as he shifted his gaze to drink in the lights, most likely looking to draw energy from them, as I had. We were more alike than I was comfortable with, but I'd come to appreciate that, too. Jean-Charles. Hearing his name constricted my heart. Had I done the right thing? Emotion had Swiss cheesed my memory, but I was pretty sure I'd thrown his ring at him. Was hurling an engagement ring a forgivable offense? Did I care? To the world, Jean-Charles Bouclé, world-renowned chef, widower, and father to the most adorable 5-year-old, Christophe, was the definition of a great catch. Up close, he wasn't quite so perfect. He suffered from a superiority complex, that Y chromosome nuance that led men to think their lives, hopes, and dreams were more important than those of the women in their life. So not true. I once had a man tell me that when I'd agreed to date him, I'd agreed to live life as he imagined it. He was lucky I let him live. Of course, I wasn't sure he wanted to after I rather forcefully disabused him of his notion. A bit of an exaggeration, but not much. But I'd cut Jean-Charles some slack. He was French, after all. In my darkest moments, I often wondered what it would be like to be a white male in a world built by and for white males. No matter where they came from or what station in life, they all had that same air. Some only a whiff, but they all had it. Until a good woman grabbed them by the short hairs. In the long run, that whole French thing, and the cooking amazing food thing, have I mentioned I love to eat, and the great in bed thing, and the fiery intellect thing, hadn't made him any more tolerable. Hence, the hurling of a 10-carat diamond at his head. To be honest, he hadn't been all that bad. Really only a little bit irritating, which was probably the most one could ask of another. And I had hardly been at my best. Here, with my father, and with my mother out of earshot, I could be the authentic me. Maybe that was the best gift of all he'd given me. I'm so tired of staring at my navel, trying to fix me. My father laughed, not his normal booming guffaw, but it was a laugh. I took that as a hopeful sign. Lucky. Just be you. I'm too stupid to keep up the pretense of being someone I'm not. No. Way too smart. He shifted, drawing the blanket higher.
Have you ever thought that maybe, sometimes, you didn't do anything wrong other than point out where someone was letting you down? It's your God-given right to demand what you need. If the friend, parent, lover, whatever, is who they should be, and they care about you as they should, then they will be grateful to know what you need. Nobody can read your mind.
I shuddered at the thought. If they could, I'd either be institutionalized or an Instagram sensation. That lit a quick smile, and I saw the hint of my father still inside a shell that must be driving him crazy with its weakness. Then he sobered.
I'm serious. You have to ask, honey, or you can't be disappointed if you don't get it.
But it's not anybody's obligation to live up to my expectations, only their own.
If they want to be in your life, they should put you first.
And vice versa. What is it you tell me? That it works best when each thinks they are giving 100%?
True. So if you choose unwisely.
He used that phraseology on purpose. He took it directly from one of my favorite scenes from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. My head melts.
Only your heart.
Yeah. I leaned back and turned my attention to the lights. Totally sucks. By his own admission, the only woman he'd ever loved was my mother, so he wouldn't know the broken heart feeling. But for my benefit, he pretended to. Of course, they'd been separated most of their lives, checking on each other from afar, but unable to live together. That had to come with its own heartbreak. Mona returned with libations, 3 fingers of amber liquid and 1 ice cube in crystal tumblers. The ice clinked happily as she first handed one to her husband, waiting until he'd secured it in both hands, then one to me. My father's hands were steady as he raised his glass and then drank like he'd crawled through the desert to an oasis, which I guess he sorta had, metaphorically speaking. Even with a private room and staff to do his bidding, I'm sure the hospital had been less than comfortable. And I knew full well it hadn't come with a fully stocked bar. I took a long pull myself. I'd recently promised myself I'd drink only when celebrating something. A hollow promise, as I'd come to realize. Each day held plenty of small moments to celebrate, and sometimes even big ones. And with my life, sometimes just making it through the day could be cause for celebration. I'd have to rethink. The key would be to find a resolution that would make me feel proud, but not be too onerous to semi-stick to. Yes, clearly I remained a bit uncommitted. In my experience, change involved pain, and I'd had enough of that for a bit. Maybe now wasn't a good time to whittle my habits into some form of respectability. I sidelined my guilt and took another sip. My father was here, my mother hadn't set the world on fire, and then asked the impossible of me to put it out, as she usually did. I'd survived, a bit unsteady, uncertain, and fractured, but all wounds time could heal. So, modest celebrations were in order. Mona pushed over the fireplace. Lucky, can you do the honors? Every time I try it, I singe my eyebrows. I bent over the thing, hit the igniter, then turned on the gas. Reasonable flames flared. No hair was sacrificed. I pushed it as close to my father as I dared. His blankets draped to the floor. The last thing I wanted to do was immolate him. Mona watched me. That's what I do wrong. I turn on the gas first, then the whole thing goes kablooey, and I find myself on my ass trying to get out of the way. I should have let you light it. I retook my position on the couch. Father hid a smile. Albert, are you hungry? Mona turned back into Miss Fairy Sunshine. Could I fix you a cold plate? I have some nice cheeses Teddy brought by. She paused, punctuating the Teddy bit with an innocent look tossed my direction. I'd never been able to decide whether Mona actually rooted for Teddy or whether she switched her allegiance to whoever was the odd man out. Knowing Mona and her penchant for championing the underdog, her strategy followed her heart and not any desired outcome. Not that it mattered. I'd long since become impervious. She harumphed, then continued. I have some kielbasa to go with it, and some of that grainy mustard you like.
That would be great, dear. Thank you.
Let me freshen your drink first. We both waited while Mona topped off his glass and added a splash to mine. I'll be a bit. You two talk. Mona ceded the floor a bit too easily, piquing my already overactive worry. She usually wanted no part of Sirius, so it looked like Sirius was what I was going to get. Both my father and I knew our cue. I eased back into the corner of the couch, angling so I could see him. I cradled my glass in both hands. What's this I hear about you checking yourself out of the hospital? I said, as Mona disappeared through the swinging doors to the kitchen. You better have something bigger than a stick to slay that dragon. Mona's words filtered back before the doors stopped swinging. My father shifted his focus to stare into the fire. He set his glass on the side table, then warmed his hands, but he didn't look at me. The classic Rothstein avoidance tactic. We only used it with big problems, or big emotions. Damn. Of course, after Miss P's warning, I'd expected as much. But irrational hope sticks with me until the last possible moment. Its extinguishment left a nothingness, a cold ball of dread deep inside.
They'd fixed what they went in for.
He shifted, then winced. I don't think so. They were chasing a bleeder. You hadn't been there long enough for them to know they got what they were after and that you'd stabilized.
They have their opinions. I have mine.
He plucked at a ball of fuzz on his blanket, then rearranged the folds more tightly around his legs. He reminded me of the old people you see dotting the lawns in their wheelchairs on a pretty spring day. I stomped on that visual until it evaporated. Father, cracking open your chest is a big deal. The sutures inside haven't had time to do their job. I'd be willing to bet most of what I have that you still have those awful staples in your chest.
You'd be right.
He shifted again, clearly agitated. This time I could see the muscles bunch in his cheek as he fought the wince.
I've got a big problem.
He darted a look toward the kitchen.
Your mother doesn't know. In fact, nobody knows.
He swiveled a side eye at me and rocked his head back and forth.
Although anybody could figure it out, if they thought to look.
Beating around the bush was so not like him. I haven't a clue what you were talking about, which, come to think of it, stands to reason since nobody knows. I tended to blather when stressed. Now was no exception.
Years ago, all the property we now consider the Strip was owned by the Mormons.
A lot of it still is, as far as I know. I always loved that. They'd own the property and rent to sinners. Somehow, reaping the rewards of debauchery didn't throw them off the highway to heaven. My smile evaporated. I think I know this punchline. The Babylon?
I acquired this property back when I didn't have a dime, and I pinched pennies so hard Lincoln screamed. Of course, I didn't have the green or the connections at the time to buy the land outright, so I leased it. Long term.
Most of the property out here was initially acquired that way. I'm sure the buyout will be excessive, but we can pay excessive. I took a sip of my drink, trying to steady my hands. So far, I didn't see too much of a problem, or at least I didn't see any problems that a pile of cash wouldn't solve. All the leases I've seen had a buyout provision. A tick worked in my father's cheek.
I was the first lease out here.
On its next trip toward my mouth, my hand stalled. A bit of wild turkey sloshed out. I ignored the cold hit on my pants. And you didn't pay a lawyer to help you?
I didn't have anything to pay them with.
A weak excuse. If anything, my father was and had always been resourceful and persuasive. He'd also had a hard-headed ego issue. Time had tempered that, but that wouldn't help us now.
There was a clause in the lease that I overlooked. Never even saw it. This was a long time ago. I was so green. Nothing was out here. Not really. All the action was still downtown. This was a bit of silliness in far rural Clark County. Hell, it wasn't even in the city.
Still isn't.
Yeah, a curious bit of local arcana. The Flamingo was out here, but a few miles south. Everybody thought my play was a boondoggle. Oh, there were a few other properties. Fleabags mostly. Long gone. Long forgotten.
Not forgotten, but I will agree with you. Nobody foresaw all of this. I swept my arm toward the view.
I had a glimmer. That's why I sold my car to lease a chunk of desert. Took me a long time to get the money to build this place.
He'd done it too. Built up other properties, sold them, built more, until he had the stake for his own place. He'd made it grander through the years until it was one of the landmarks where everybody had to come, and more importantly, had to gamble.
I figured I'd renew, at an exorbitant price, I'm sure. I banked on building a property that could afford it.
He gave me his old, full-wattage smile.
I did.
Yes, you did. Legacy of a lifetime. Instead of puffing up, he wilted. What? For the life of me, I couldn't see a downside so huge he'd put his life on the line to be here to tell me about it.
They could take it all.
What? I could barely eke out the word.
The lease is written in such a way that they can choose to renew. If they don't want to, I forfeit anything built on the property. Oh, it's written much more cleverly, but that's what I've been told. Of course, we can litigate, but I might not live to see the end of that.
The fact that he'd lived with this, and it hadn't killed him, gave me hope. At least that would buy us time. The enormity of the problem hit me, leaving me numb. The Babylon was my life, my home, even more so for my parents. The employees were our family. How long have you known about this?
A few months. A shady legal frontman out of Shanghai came calling, briefcase in hand. Some rich guy had bought out the lease. He's one of the big players in Macau now.
And he's looking to upgrade to a primo Vegas property and all the face that comes with that. We both fell silent, each wrestling with our own thoughts. I needed to even the playing field. We needed a savvy, ruthless, and a bit sketchy player, familiar with the power brokers in Macau. Someone willing to push the bounds of fair play, and sometimes ignore them altogether. This was life and death. A smile lifted one corner of my mouth. My father must have seen it.
You've got something. I knew I could count on you.
His relief was almost palpable. Not so fast. I've got a friend who knows the back alleys of Macau and is conversant in high finance, but he may be dead. Oddly, the thought made me sad.
Dead? Who?
My father was clearly taken aback. Yes, you never want to know everyone your progeny hangs out with, trust me. He's a Hong Kong financier and weekend pirate. He'd run afoul of the triad. I waved his concern away. It was part of the Paris mess. Anyway, we got things sort of tidied up, and I offered him a ride to Monaco to try to settle with the big bosses. I used the term specifically, not sure why. I really wished my father would stop thinking of himself as a big boss. That term invited all kinds of stupid behavior.
Where is he now?
I have no idea.
But you can find him?
Yes, once I have my phone back. If he managed to survive without my help, which I put at 50-50. The better question is whether I can outmaneuver him. He's a challenge. He'd tried to set me up for the theft of a bunch of expensive watches. I'd returned the favor. Then he'd tried again in Bordeaux, but I'd been a step ahead of him. I wish I could say I was that clever, but in truth, I was that lucky.
Really?
Something in the way my father said the word made me glance at him. Yes, I like a challenge, but I have this trust issue thing, you know. I held up my hand, redirecting the conversation. Tell me about the guy in Macau. He's not the same guy who put a bullet in your chest?
No, not related. At least, not that we can discern.
We?
Me and the only lawyer I trust.
His gaze skittered away. Who? I asked, but I knew.
Squash Trenton.
Some days, I hated being right. This wasn't one of them. Not really. Squash was as clever as a junkyard dog, and about as vicious in protecting those he cared about. He and my parents were tight, very tight. I blew the bangs that tickled my eyes, lifting them off my forehead. Squash and I had solved a problem or two together. A few big ones, several smaller ones. I liked him, perhaps a bit too much, which made him dangerous.
You two work well together.
My father said it as if he knew of the chemistry that sizzled between us. And it wasn't just sexual, although there was that. I couldn't explain it, but it was definitely a thing. My father squirmed under my long stare. Squash Trenton. If things weren't so dire, I'd say this reeked of a setup. I hated being maneuvered. My father knew that. But he was doing it anyway. That reeked of desperation. Yes, but if Squash can't solve it with legal razzle-dazzle,
we could use your guy in Macau if he's not 6 feet under.
And if they can't wiggle us out of this, what do you expect me to do? My father leveled a serious gaze.
Fix it.